Well, good morning. It's good to see all of you. Your presence here, I think, is encouragement to me. I know it's encouragement to others that are here. We hope that, if you're visiting with us, that we'll say, perhaps do something that'll be an encouragement to you before you leave here to uplift you. I want to begin our lesson by thinking this question. What do you see when you see people? What do you see? If only we could see people as Jesus saw people, what a difference that would make. Jesus' ministry was in full swing. He had delivered the Sermon on the Mount. It was a sermon that got people's attention. They came to realize that he was no ordinary teacher. He was special. Not only was his teaching extraordinary, but his miracles were breathtaking. By the time you get to our passage, you'll notice that he had cleansed the leper. He had healed a paralytic. He had stopped a woman's flow of blood. He had restored the sight to two blind men. And he had cast out countless demons from people along the way. And that kind of summarizes, in essence, Matthew chapters 8 and 9. And in Matthew 9, verses 35 to 38, Matthew provides us with an inspired summary of Jesus' public ministry to date. And if you were to look at this, you may do this at some point, you'll see that what is said here echoes in many ways what is said in Matthew chapter 4, verses 23 through 25. It kind of forms an inclusio, kind of drawing these sections together. And in this passage, verses 35 through 38 of Matthew chapter 9, Matthew shows us, among other things, how Jesus saw the people that he encountered as his public ministry was gaining momentum. And how Jesus saw people gives us an example of how we should see people today. So let's begin with reading our text again. I'm going to get it up here in front of you so you can see it. This is what our lesson is going to be based on. By the way, the bare bones outline of this breakdown is indebted to Neil Pollard. Some of you may have heard of him. He's a preacher in Denver, Colorado, and he is connected with the Bear Valley Institute up there. That's a part of the congregation for which he preaches. He's going to be coming over, I guess, next year for our lectureship. And so the basic outline he broke down struck me as good, and something certainly I could serve as a launching pad. But here's the text. And Jesus went throughout. Again, we've seen a lot of little incidences in his life. We've seen this. We've heard the sermon, and we've seen some of the things he's done. We've heard his teaching, and we've seen what he's doing. And it says that Jesus went throughout all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, and proclaiming, preaching the gospel of the kingdom, and healing every disease and every affliction. And when he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were, as the ESV says, harassed and helpless. Your translation might say, weary and scattered. And then they're compared to like sheep without a shepherd. And then he said to his disciples, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly for the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. There's other things we can talk about here, but for our purpose this morning, I want to focus on what this text provides us with respect to how Jesus saw people. So the first one comes from verse 35. Jesus saw them as hurting. To be sure, their hurts were physical. All right? You had sickness, you had disease, you had that mysterious phenomenon that's occasioned no shortage of discussion, demon possession. All right? But it was there. People were suffering. People were hurting. All of this, of course, were consequences of being banned from the Garden of Eden as a result of Adam and Eve's sin. And those hurts mattered to Jesus. They mattered to him. His heart went out to them. He felt deeply for them. And he took action. Jesus helped the hurting. Now, what about you? Like Jesus, you and I need to approach people the same way. Sensitive to the hurts that they harbor. Now, the hurts we encounter may be physical. More often than not, guess what? They're going to be social, emotional, mental. In my ministry here at Greenback, since we got started in 2006, I've had a host of opportunities to meet people and to try to serve people, not just among us, but in the community at large. I remember a lady by the name of Georgette. She came to me, and she was hurting. A year prior, she had lost her son at the age of 21 to cancer. And the pain she was feeling when I met her was just as real as if he had just passed away. Some of you might remember a guy named Jerry. He didn't get to come but like once or twice to service. We baptized him in 2007 as a result of the Mount Juliet campaign. And I would go, after that, I would go to his house every week, at least for a couple hours every week to do a Bible study, talk with him, visit with him. He had a lung disease. It was very difficult for him to breathe. I mean, just getting up out of bed and getting to his recliner in his living room was a chore. And he was pretty much confined to his house. Jerry was hurting. Some of you might recall his name was Tim, and he lived with and he worked with the Deegers down the road. From the age of 19 to the age of 34, he had been battling a cocaine addiction. Blows my mind. 19 to 24. Now that's like 15 years. And, you know, his home life had been less than stellar. And so in order to escape that hurt, you know, he just basically stepped into another world of hurt. You know? And here's the thing. That's just scratching the surface of the people that I personally have come in contact with that were hurting in one way or another. I've met a lot of hurting people, and here's the thing, you have to. And if you really begin to think back over the last 5 to 6 years, you've come in contact with these people, might even had an opportunity to serve them in some way or to help them in some way. And here's the thing, unlike Jesus, we are limited in what we can do in certain cases. For instance, I cannot bring back Georgette's son from the dead. I cannot restore Jerry's lungs to their full vitality. And of myself, I cannot remove Tim's addiction to cocaine. But here's some things I can do. I can care. And I can be sympathetic. And I can pray. And I can refuse to ostracize them. As Christians, That's you, that's me. We cannot be callous and unfeeling to people's hurts. Most of the people we come in contact with, okay, whatever way, through your work, whatever, most of the people we come in contact with are hurting in one way or another. And those of us who are Christians have got to be willing to enter into that pain and seek to redeem it by pointing them to Jesus, the great physician. When you see people, do you see their hurts? Now here's another thing Jesus saw. Jesus saw them as hopeless. Now, please don't misunderstand. I am not saying that Jesus saw them as lost causes. Okay? They didn't get a chance in the world, and this is pitiful. You know? He didn't see them as lost causes, but he saw them as people in search of a hope that eluded them. The people Jesus saw, now my ESV says, harassed and helpless. Here's what's interesting. If we were to get real literal in our translation, to kind of bring in some things that we've talked about in our classes, you could render this torn and thrown down. Torn and thrown down. And you know what the imagery is? It's going to really come out in the next section when it says like sheep without a shepherd, but already that imagery is coming into view here. Torn and thrown down, reference to sheep who are what? Who become easy prey for predators or suffering because of unscrupulous shepherds. To give you an example, I'll give you this is kind of a graphic, but this is Zechariah 11:16, and this essentially describes what we're talking about here. And here, of course, this is in prophecy, and the Lord's basically saying, Israel, because you have betrayed me, and because you have forsaken me, here's something I'm going to do in the way of punishment. But just listen to this. For behold, I am raising up in the land a shepherd who does not care for those being destroyed, or seek the young, or heal the maimed, or nourish the healthy, but devours the flesh of the fat ones, tearing off even their hooves. What did God say there? He said, I'm going to raise up a shepherd, that doesn't care about you in the way of punishment. And what are the effects of that? Harassed, helpless, weary, scattered, torn, and thrown down. Jesus saw these people, and he saw their situation. The people Jesus saw, the text says, were like sheep without a shepherd. Now, this statement is actually an Old Testament metaphor, and you can go into your Old Testament, and I can give you several passages where that idea comes to the forefront. And in many of those cases, it's primarily referring to a lack of political leadership. All right? But in this context, and in other contexts as well, I think it's denoting a lack of spiritual care and guidance. This was the case at one point for God's people in the Old Testament. In Zechariah 10, verses 2 and 3, listen to this. For the household gods utter nonsense, gods, of course, being the little g, and the diviners, see lies. They tell false dreams, and they give empty consolation. Therefore, the people wander like sheep. They are afflicted for lack of a shepherd. What are they doing? They're looking to all these other places for hope. And they don't have someone to guide them. They're in trouble. The people that Jesus was talking to in context in Matthew chapter 9, they were Jews. And guess who their quote-unquote shepherds were supposed to be? They're religious leaders. All right, they're spiritual shepherds. Like the Pharisees, the Sadducees. And guess what? Jesus enters into this situation and realizes that the religious leadership had failed these people. They've become wandering sheep. They were fearful and they were hopeless. Certainly scared. But their condition drew Jesus' concern. Our text says that when he saw them, he had compassion for them. The word compassion here, to have compassion, literally refers to a gut reaction. Have you ever had that? Have you ever seen somebody in a certain state and you have a gut reaction to that moves you to action in order to meet the needs that evoked that gut reaction? Have you ever been there? That's what's going on here. Jesus saw their situation, their hopeless situation, and it moved him. And Jesus still wants this for people today, but guess what? Today, he works through us. We need to see the hopelessness and the lack of direction of the countless people with whom we come in contact. Like Jesus, it should draw our concern. We live in a world of hopeless people who are looking for hope in all the wrong places. They're looking for it in one interreligion to another interreligion. They're looking for it in one self-help guru to another self-help guru. They're looking for it in one spouse to another spouse. I mean, people are looking for peace, hope, stability, a sense of purpose, and they're looking for it oftentimes in all the wrong places. So what do we do as Christians? Well, as Christians, we've got to be willing to meet their hopelessness head on and point them to Jesus, the great shepherd, the good shepherd. When you see people, do you see their hopelessness? Now, the last one here. The first couple of things point to the people's need. They had needs. They had needs that needed meeting. And this spur, their need was one spur to urgency. But that wasn't just the only thing that spurred urgency. Another was opportunity. Opportunity. Jesus said to his disciples, there in verses 37 and 38, the harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few. Therefore, pray earnestly to the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Now here's what's interesting. You know that word, that metaphor of harvest? That can have sort of a judgment day, end of time situation. It can point to a situation like that. What I mean is like the end time harvest. Alright? Where Jesus, the angels, they come and they take what? They take the good to heaven, and then the others are condemned to hell. But that's not what's in view here. That's not how the imagery is being used here. All right, the word, the idea of laborers here is not, sending out angels to take people, a final judgment or something. These laborers are men and women who are being asked to go out and save people from the judgment to come. That's the idea here. God's looking for them. The context of this shows that these are people that he's wanting to be sent out. In context, starting with his 12 apostles, going to send them out to rescue others from this judgment. And this task, for this task, the disciples at this time were few, Jesus says. And frankly, I think if we're honest with ourselves, it's kind of always been that way. Few. There's a lot of people that need to be rescued from judgment. But there's too few people to go out and rescue them. And the command, what is it? Ask, pray earnestly to the Lord of harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. That prayer has not been superseded by anything else. It's still important. That's still a good prayer. Now, in this context, Jesus is dispatching his 12 apostles to minister to the people. That's going to pick up there at verse 10. Okay? So what's interesting about this passage, yeah, it's a summary statement, but it's also a transitional statement because it's about to move from Jesus' ministry to what? To his disciples' ministry. And they are going to be carrying on in the world, what? The mission of Jesus. They, in their own lives, are going to be people who are living out the mission of Jesus Christ. In many ways, reflecting everything that he taught and did. And here's the thing, that was true for the 12 apostles, but it's still true for us today. Jesus' concern for people has not been abated. And Jesus' call for laborers to go out and bring in the harvest, guess what? That is still a call that is being made today. He wants you and I in the harvest fields helping and reaching the hurting and the hopeless. You and I are to be Jesus' harvesters of the hurting and the hopeless. But here's the thing. You and I will never, ever, 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 ever fulfill that mission unless we start seeing people the way that Jesus saw people. When you start seeing people as hurting and hopeless, stop all your superficial stuff. We're good at that, aren't we? We just see people for what they have, sometimes what they don't have. We got to start seeing them through eternal eyes. We got to start seeing, and when we start seeing their hurts and their hopelessness, then we're also going to start seeing them as a harvest. We're going to start seeing them as people that we got to do whatever we can to bring them to Jesus, the great physician, the great shepherd. And I pray that as you continue here, I continue here at Greenback, I pray that the Lord of harvest will be with us as we seek to bring the hurting and the hopeless, because there's a lot of them, isn't there? Tons of them. Jesus saw them that way. You got to do the same. You got to feel that. You got to have compassion. Because if you don't have that gut reaction, you're not going to be moved to do anything. See, for this morning, if you are a Christian, I pray that you will do what you can to make a difference in this world, to carry on in your own life the mission of Jesus, seeing people the way Jesus saw people, seeking to bring them in. And if you're not a Christian this morning, it may be a couple of things. Number one, you're confused. You have no idea what that involves. What's the commitment? What does that look like? I've heard this, I've heard that, I've seen this, I've seen that. I'm confused about what becoming a Christian or being saved is all about. Love to talk about that with you and think about that. It may be that you do know what that involves, but you just haven't done it. And come with a heart full of faith, penitent of your sins, willing to confess that Jesus Christ is indeed the Son of God, will immerse you in water for the forgiveness of your sins, to rise and walk in newness of life, and honestly to have a hope that so many people in this world are searching for.